Okay, here's a question for you. If a researcher at Duke University found that more than 40% of the actions you perform each day aren't actual decisions but habits, how much of your life are you truly controlling?
It's a staggering thought, isn't it?
It really is. I
Yeah.
mean, think about that for a second. Nearly half of your day, your conscious, productive day, is just running on this invisible autopilot. It's guided by these neurological patterns that were probably set a long, long time ago.
hmm
So today, we're going to unpack the hidden architecture of those patterns. We're talking about the invisible formula that dictates our productivity, our health, our happiness even, our financial security. It's the science of why we do what we do in life and in business.
And for this deep dive, we're centering on the really groundbreaking work of Charles Duhigg.
Right, from his incredible book, The Power of Habit, Why We Do What We Do in Life and Business. And Duhigg's background is really interesting here. He wasn't a neurologist. He was an investigative reporter for the New York Times.
Which I think gives him this really unique lens.
It does. And he first got interested in this whole science of habit formation when he was covering the U.S. military in Baghdad. He saw it as this. I mean, just one of the biggest, most intense habit formation experiments in history.
All that training, the repetition.
Exactly. Building bases, responding to complex attacks. It's all about endlessly rehearsed routines. He saw the power of these predictable patterns, even in something as chaotic as warfare. And he brought that same analytical eye to understand why, you and I struggle to change the small stuff in our daily lives.
It's a fascinating stuff.
It's absolutely fascinating. And actually, before we plunge headfirst into all the neurological truths hidden in this research, just a quick reminder. If you're enjoying this, make sure you're following us here at Audible Books. That way you'll never miss a captivating summary and analysis of the world's most important work.
Okay, so our mission today, as you're listening, is pretty straightforward. We need to understand the fundamental mechanics behind these automatic patterns.
Right, not just to recognize them, but to actually do something about them.
Exactly. So you can not only see them in your own life, but learn the specific methods you need to, break them down and then rebuild them to your own specifications. It turns out transforming a habit isn't just about grit or willpower. It's a matter of applied neurological mechanics.
So to really understand how to change a habit, we first have to go deep inside the brain.
We do. And we're going to meet some truly unforgettable people who reveal the surprising, almost terrifying neurological truth of automation.
Okay, so let's start with the foundational concept. Duhigg calls it the habit loop. It's the formula that allows our brain to essentially put complex tasks on snooze and save a massive amount of energy.
And it's a three-step sequence. It's always these three parts: the cue, the routine, and the reward.
So what's the brain's big evolutionary goal here with this loop? Why does it do this?
The goal is a process that neurologists call chunking. It's basically converting a sequence of actions, like, say, backing your car out of the driveway, into one single automatic routine, a chunk of behavior.
To save mental effort.
To save a ton of mental effort. Our brains are, evolutionarily speaking, they're inherently lazy. They're always looking for ways to power down. Think about learning to drive, or even just tying your shoes when you were a kid.
Oh, yeah. Total concentration.
Right. Initially, every single step, backing the car out, checking the mirrors, turning the wheel, it all requires this furious conscious effort. But over time, all those tasks become one single chunk that it operates with almost no conscious input at all.
So if the conscious brain kind of steps aside, what part of the brain takes over? And I guess the bigger question is, what happens if that conscious memory is completely erased?
And that is where this one specific brain structure comes in. It's called the basal ganglia. It's this ancient primal part of the brain deep down near the brainstem. And it's basically the master warehouse for storing and recalling all these automated patterns.
This is where we get to the story of Eugene Pauly, or EP, as he's known in the research.
Yes. And his case is it's the perfect illustration of how the basal ganglia can operate completely independently of our conscious thought.
So Dr. Squire's work with EP is really central here. Can you just describe how debilitating his amnesia was? What made him so different from other famous cases, like HM?
Well, in 1992, EP suffered from a severe viral encephalitis. It essentially destroyed his medial temporal lobe, which includes the hippocampus. That's the area you need to form new conscious memories.
So his memory was just frozen.
Well, completely frozen in time. He couldn't remember what day it was. He didn't know the names of his own grandchildren or even that he had the disease. You could leave the room, come back 2 minutes later, and he'd greet you like a complete stranger. It was total anterograde amnesia, no new memories, and severe retrograde amnesia, so he lost a lot of his past, too.
And yet, despite this total memory loss, he was able to live at home in San Diego, which is amazing because other famous amnesiacs like HM had to be institutionalized. What was the difference?
The difference was that in EP's case, while all the memory centers were destroyed, the basal ganglia, it was miraculously spared.
The habit warehouse was still intact.
It was perfectly intact. And researchers discovered that even though he couldn't form new conscious memories, Eugene could still learn new behaviors, new patterns. For instance, in one test, they showed him pairs of cards and asked him to pick the one with a correct symbol.
And he'd have no memory of playing the game before.
None at all. He never consciously remembered the symbols or the rules, but after hundreds and hundreds of repetitions, his basal ganglia learned the pattern. His accuracy shot up to 85%.
But he couldn't tell you how he knew.
Exactly. He'd just say, I have a gut feeling about this one. His body knew the answer, even if his conscious mind had no clue.
That's the really bizarre part, isn't it?
Yeah.
The automatic brain is somehow smarter than the conscious brain.
Oh.
Did his wife, Beverly, see this happen at home? These kinds of repeated patterns that were totally disconnected from his memory?
Oh, absolutely. She noticed it all the time in their new house. He couldn't draw you a map of the house. If you asked him which door led to the kitchen, he would just guess. He had no idea. But if he was hungry, he would just stand up from his chair and automatically walk the precise path to the kitchen, open the right cabinet, and grab a specific jar of nuts. It wasn't a choice. It was a script, a habit loop.
Wow.
And even more jarring was the repeated breakfast incident. Beverly would notice that sometimes he'd wake up, go to the kitchen, cook a full breakfast of bacon and eggs, eat it, and then go back to bed.
And then
40 minutes later, he'd stand up and repeat the entire process. He would eat breakfast multiple times in one morning.
because the cues were still there.
Exactly. The cues, the morning light coming through the window, the sound of the radio turning on, would trigger the established routine that was stored deep in his basal ganglia. He would just automatically follow the script with no memory that he had literally just eaten.
That is just, it's proof positive that the habit loop can operate entirely outside of conscious control. It's driven solely by the environmental cue and that subconscious craving for the reward. In this case, feeling full.
But the most important demonstration of the basal ganglia's power was his walks.
Right. The doctors told his wife he could never leave the house alone.
They said he would get instantly lost and never find his way back. But one day, he slipped out. Beverly panicked, of course. But within 15 minutes, he was back, just standing calmly at the front door.
And he couldn't consciously recognize his own house or remember the route.
Not at all. He wasn't navigating by memory, he was navigating by routine. The sequence of cues, a certain tree on a corner, the placement of a specific mailbox, a crack in the sidewalk, those were the triggers. Each cue triggered the next segment of the routine, which always led him back home.
It just shows how incredibly durable that loop is once it's established.
And this durability, this is what was verified scientifically with neuroimaging in the MIT T-shaped maze experiments with rats.
Right. This is where we really see the brain's energy conservation effort in action. So can you detail those experiments for us? How did the rats show the exact moment a decision becomes an automated chunk of behavior?
The setup was pretty ingenious. They put rats in a long chamber with a partition blocking a T-junction. When a loud click sounded, the partition would move, and the rat could run down the maze, turn left or right, and find a piece of chocolate.
And they had tiny probes monitoring the brain activity, right? Specifically in the basal ganglia.
They did. So let's look at the data, the neurological graph. When the rats were first learning the maze, when it was still a conscious decision, what did that brain activity look like?
Well, initially, the brain was just working furiously the whole time. We see these massive sustained spikes in the basal ganglia as the rat is processing everything, every sight, every smell, the texture of the walls, the uncertainty of which way to turn.
The brain is fully engaged. It's trying to solve a problem. How do I get that chocolate?
But then as rats ran the maze hundreds of times, always straight, turn right, get the chocolate, that neurological pattern just changed dramatically. The sequence got converted into a single chunk.
This is where it gets really interesting. The brain activity during the run itself, the routine, it just plummeted. It decreased dramatically. The basal ganglia basically took over, allowing the rest of the brain to power down and, think about other things, or maybe nothing at all.
So it's the neurological fingerprint of a habit.
Precisely. The critical insight is that the brain only spikes its activity in two places, at the cue and at the reward. In the experiment, the click of the partition moving was the cue. The brain would spike right then as if it was saying, okay, time to execute the maze habit.
And then it goes quiet during the run.
Almost completely quiet. And it only spikes again at the very end, at the reward, the moment the rat finds and starts eating the chocolate.
So those two spikes, the cue and the reward, they're like the bookends for the habit. The brain wakes up to check that the cue is there, runs the automated program, and then wakes up again at the end just to confirm it got the expected reward.
It's an incredibly efficient system.
And that's the system that's guiding our daily behaviors. Whether it's grabbing your phone every time it buzzes or heading to the couch right after dinner. Cue, routine, reward. The loop is just running the show.
It also explains why some habits are so hard to break. The research showed these patterns can become so powerful they can actually override self-preservation.
You mentioned the mice trained to press a lever for a food reward. What happened when the situation turned harmful?
Yeah, the findings were pretty startling. After the habit was firmly established, the researchers changed the conditions. They either poisoned the food or they electrified the floor right where the lever was.
So the mice learned to avoid it.
They learned to avoid the food or the shock when they were just roaming around the cage, sure. But, and this is the key part, when the cue appeared, which was a light turning on signaling the lever was accessible, they couldn't stop themselves. They continued to automatically press the lever even as they were getting painful shocks or vomiting from the poison.
The habit loop was so ingrained it literally made them hurt themselves.
They couldn't stop executing the routine once the trigger appeared.
That sounds terrifyingly fatalistic. If the habit is stored that deep in the basal ganglia, and the evidence shows the patterns stick with us even when they actively harm us, we can't just wish them away. So
Yeah.
what does this mean for actually changing? If the habit never really disappears, how do we ever replace it?
Well, that leads us directly to the fundamental law of habit mechanics. It's what Duhigg calls the golden rule of habit change.
Right.
Since the old habits never truly disappear, they're just encoded down there in the basal ganglia, dormant but always ready to reactivate change requires a very specific approach. You have to create new neurological routines that are strong enough to overpower the old ones.
And the golden rule is all about specificity, right?
Yeah.
You can't just remove the habit. You have to surgically replace one part of it.
You have to. You must address the old craving directly. And the way you do that is by keeping the original cue and providing the same reward, but you insert a brand new routine in between them.
So if you don't identify the true craving that's driving the whole behavior, you're powerless.
You're completely powerless. You're like the shoppers at the mall who just wander, as if they're drawn by some unseen force right into a Cinnabon. They don't want a cinnamon roll because they consciously decided to be hungry. They want it because that powerful smell, the cue, triggered a deep subconscious craving for an immediate fat and sugar payoff.
And to overpower that, you have to know what craving you're actually trying to satisfy.
You have to know which craving is driving the behavior and then satisfy it in a different, healthier way.
There's an incredible example of this kind of personal transformation in the book. It's the story of Lisa Allen. And it's a perfect template for the golden rule in action.
Yeah, her story is amazing. She was really struggling with this complex web of destructive habits. She'd been smoking and drinking since she was 16. She was obese. She was buried under $10,000 in debt.
And she was going through a really difficult, stressful divorce, which had led her to some pretty destructive behaviors, like stalking her ex-husband's new girlfriend. She was just in a deep pit of desperation.
So we can break down her initial destructive loop. The core cue for her was that feeling of desperation or just emotional stress from her chaotic life.
And the desired reward was, what? A sense of relief.
A sense of relief, stimulation, some kind of emotional control, just a brief escape from her reality. And her initial routine to get that reward was smoking, drinking, and overeating.
The turning point for her was subtle, but it was incredibly powerful. She takes this rash, impulsive trip to Cairo.
Right. She's sitting in a taxi just looking out at the vast desert, completely overwhelmed by her life. And she realizes she desperately needs to change just one thing she could control. And she sets this massive, seemingly impossible goal for herself.
To come back in a year and trek through that desert.
Exactly. And she became utterly convinced that she had to quit smoking to achieve this goal. Now, the crazy thing is, the expedition she eventually signed up for was motorized and air-conditioned.
So the details didn't even matter.
The logistical details were irrelevant. It was the conviction, the belief that she needed to quit smoking for this larger purpose. That was the real engine of change. And that one small shift, that new focus, just radiated outward.
Can you explain that radiating effect? Because it's amazing. How did quitting smoking end up fixing her finances and her diet?
Well, over the next 6 months, the routine of smoking was completely replaced by jogging. Whenever the stress hit, that was the cue. Instead of lighting a cigarette, she laced up her running shoes. That was the new routine. And it satisfied the same craving for relief and control, the reward.
And that one change created a domino effect.
A huge domino effect. Because she was jogging, she naturally started paying more attention to her diet. Because she was healthier, she had more energy for her job, and her performance improved. Because she was so focused on her health and this big goal, she started paying attention to her budget so she could save money for the trip.
So the single habit of changing how she handled stress, from smoking to running, it started a chain reaction of other good habits taking hold. It fixed her obesity, her debt, her need to self-medicate her anxiety.
It's the perfect, powerful illustration of the golden rule. She kept the cue, that need for relief from stress, and she kept the reward, that feeling of accomplishment or control. But she radically shifted the routine to jogging instead of smoking.
And this kind of surgical approach, it's not just for personal transformation. It applies just as brilliantly in the corporate world. And the book has the perfect example, the initial failure and eventual spectacular success of Febreze.
Ah, yes, Febreze. It's hard to imagine now, but that product, the famous odor-eliminating spray from P&G, was a spectacular commercial flop at first.
So why did it fail so badly? The technology worked, right?
The technology was sound. The problem was P&G marketed it logically. They targeted bad smells. So the intended cue was detecting an odor, and the desired reward was scentlessness, or odor elimination.
And the problem was, people don't notice their own bad smell.
Exactly. People become noseblind, they get desensitized. The researchers in the book talk about visiting a woman who had 9 cats, and even though the smell was so overwhelming it made the P&G researcher gag, the woman herself claimed she only noticed the odor about once a month.
So the intended cue was totally invisible to the very people who needed the product the most.
Right. The team at P&G eventually realized that no one actually craves scentlessness. It's not a rewarding feeling.
So they had to pivot the entire marketing strategy. They had to find a different craving to attach the product to. What did they find?
Well, the researchers started observing people's cleaning habits, and they noticed something interesting. A lot of women would spray Febreze after they had just finished cleaning a room or making a bed.
So not to get rid of a bad smell.
No, they were using it as a finishing touch. The craving wasn't for the absence of smell. The craving was for the feeling of completion. It was for a nice scent that signified a job well done. The cleaning itself was the routine, but it lacked a clear sensory reward at the end.
This is the golden rule applied to cleaning. So the new cue became finishing the cleaning routine, the freshly made bed, the just vacuumed carpet.
The routine was spritzing Febreze, and the reward was that distinct pleasant scent and the feeling of accomplishment that came with it. They basically recognized an existing pattern of behavior cleaning and just inserted a new sensory payoff at the end.
So they immediately added more perfume to the formula.
They did. They made the scent stronger, so the sensory reward was faster and more obvious. They changed all the ads to show women spraying freshly made beds and clean laundry, emphasizing that sensory payoff. They changed the tagline from "gets bad smells out of fabrics" to "cleans life smells."
And the results were pretty much immediate.
Almost immediate. Sales doubled within 2 months of that 1998 relaunch. It went on to become a billion-dollar-a-year product. They didn't invent a new market. They just brilliantly leveraged an existing habit loop, that universal craving for completion and reward after you put in some effort.
This approach of recognizing the cue, isolating the craving, and replacing the routine, it's also the foundation of a surprisingly effective therapy technique called habit reversal training.
It is. The book tells the story of Mandy, a grad student who was struggling with severe destructive nail biting. I mean, she would bite them until they pulled away from the skin.
And she tried quitting with willpower, but it never worked.
Never. As soon as she was distracted, doing homework or watching TV, her fingers were right back in her mouth before she even realized it. It was completely automatic.
So her therapist used this same dissection technique.
The exact same one. Identify the cue and the reward that Mandy wasn't consciously aware of. The therapist asked her to start tracking the habit, to note exactly when and where the biting happened and what she felt right before it started.
And what did she discover was the actual trigger? The cue.
She realized the cue was a very specific tension in her fingertips, a slight discomfort or a tiny imperfection in the skin or the nail bed. And the underlying reward wasn't self-mutilation, it was the quick physical stimulation she got from the activity. She was never consciously aware of that craving for stimulation until she deliberately looked for it.
So the cue is tension and the reward is stimulation. What was the new competing routine she inserted?
She was taught a competing response. Whenever she felt that specific tension in her fingertips, she had to immediately put her hands in her pockets or grip a pencil or cross her arms, any action that made the old routine impossible.
Okay.
And then she was instructed to immediately seek quick physical stimulation in a different way, like rubbing her arm or rapidly rapping her knuckles on her desk.
That seems, I don't know, almost ridiculously simple. Too easy to be effective against a compulsion she's had for decades.
That's the genius of it. Habit reversal training has a success rate that often exceeds 90% for these kinds of issues. Nail biting, tics, even trichotillomania, because it bypasses the need for constant, exhausting willpower.
Is it just a mechanical swap?
It's a mechanical swap. By making the underlying cravings conscious and providing an immediate, socially acceptable alternative routine that delivers the exact same reward, the new pattern quickly starts to override the old one in the basal ganglia.
So this is something you can apply to almost anything. If you're snacking at your desk at 3 p.m., are you actually craving food? Or are you craving an interruption to your boredom?
Exactly. If it's boredom, a quick walk around the floor, a 5-minute chat with a coworker, or just 3 minutes of stretching can provide the exact same reward interruption and stimulation without the calories.
And for something like smoking, you have to be really honest about the craving. Is it the nicotine? Or is it the structure it gives your day, that guaranteed 5-minute break, or the way it helps you socialize?
Right. If it's stimulation you're after, studies show that a cup of coffee, or a quick set of push-ups, or a short phone call to a friend can provide a similar payoff. Understanding the cues and cravings doesn't make the bad habits just magically disappear, but it gives you a conscious, actionable way to plan how to install a new, healthier pattern.
Okay, so we've established the mechanics of how to change an individual habit, that cue, routine, reward loop, but how do you get leverage? How do you find that one small change that triggers a massive radiating effect across totally unrelated parts of your life? That's the real shortcut.
And that brings us perfectly into the next big idea from the book, the power of what Duhigg calls keystone habits.
Keystone habits. So
Yes.
these are small shifts in one specific area that start a chain reaction.
They do. They create these cultural shifts, either in a person or an organization, that help other unrelated good habits take hold. They prove that not all habits are created equal. Some just have this disproportionate domino-like effect.
What are some of the common keystone habits we might recognize in daily life?
Well, they're often surprisingly simple daily actions. For example, there are studies showing that people who consistently make their bed every morning are correlated with better productivity at work, a stronger sense of well-being, and, kind of surprisingly, stronger budgeting skills.
Making your bed is linked to better finances.
It's a correlation, yeah. Or another one is the habit of having regular family dinners. It's strongly correlated with kids getting better grades and having better emotional control. That single, small structure seems to become a scaffold for overall success.
And the ultimate organizational example of this has to be the story of Paul O'Neill's time at Alcoa.
Oh, absolutely. The struggling, notoriously dangerous aluminum manufacturer. When O'Neill, who later became the Treasury Secretary, took over in 1987, investors were expecting him to talk about inventories, capital ratios, cost-cutting.
The usual CEO stuff.
The usual stuff. Instead, he just shocked the room by focusing on one seemingly completely unrelated metric: worker safety. He set this audacious goal of 0 injuries.
Which must have sounded crazy to Wall Street.
It did, but the brilliance of this choice was twofold. First, nobody could argue against safety. Not the unions, not the skeptical managers, not the investors. It was morally unassailable.
Right.
And second, O'Neill realized something profound. To achieve 0 injuries, the company had to stop the manufacturing process from going wrong at all. Correct work is, by definition, safer work. So this one focus forced a radical realignment of the entire corporate culture, which was what Alcoa desperately needed.
So how did focusing on safety specifically force these big changes in efficiency and communication?
O'Neill created a keystone habit loop that was centered entirely on injury prevention. The cue was any employee injury.
Okay.
The mandated routine was that the unit president had to stop everything they were doing, investigate, and report that injury directly to O'Neill, including a detailed plan to prevent it from ever happening again. all within 24 hours.
That's a tight deadline.
A very tight deadline. And that reporting requirement forced complete transparency and rapid communication across all levels of the organization, regardless of the normal hierarchy. To meet that 24-hour deadline, unit presidents had to streamline their internal communication. They had to talk to shift workers and engineers in real time. This level of scrutiny had never existed before.
And what was the reward for following this new routine?
The explicit reward was promotion and career advancement. Those were only available to the people who fully embraced the new safety system. If a unit president dragged their feet on reporting an injury or implementing a fix, they were very quickly sidelined.
And the results were just stunning.
They were. Safety improvements required managers to embrace quality control and efficiency, because equipment malfunctions were not only unsafe, they were a primary cause of subpar aluminum. So by fixing the safety habit, they streamlined the entire manufacturing process, they reduced waste, and they dramatically improved quality.
And he never even promised increased profits.
Never. But within a few years, Alcoa's injury rate fell to 1/20th of the U.S. average, and its market capitalization grew from $3 billion to $27 billion. The safety habit created the structure and transparency that allowed all these other efficiency and quality habits to just flourish.
This Keystone habit principle works just as powerfully for elite personal performance. The example of Olympic swimming icon Michael Phelps is just perfect.
It really is. His success wasn't just raw physical talent, it was a psychological architecture that was meticulously designed by his coach, Bob Bowman.
Bowman's insight was that physical talent just fails under pressure if the mind is forced to make decisions in the moment.
Exactly. So he designed this complex, completely inflexible pre-race routine that became a Keystone habit loop. It was designed to eliminate stress and any decision-making at the crucial moments.
Can you tell us about the specificity of that routine?
Oh, it was like clockwork. It included a precise 45-minute warm-up down to the meter, 800 meters mixed stroke, 600 meters kicking, 400 meters pulling, and so on. Every movement, every stretch, every muscle activation was exactly the same every single time.
And crucially, this was followed by a visualization script.
Yes. Every single night, Phelps would perform relaxation exercises and then mentally rehearse his perfect race. He saw the water splashing off his fingers, he smelled the chlorine, and Bowman made him visualize not just the victory, but the obstacles.
A slow start, a mistake on a turn.
A suit ripping. The idea being that by the time the actual race started, he was already halfway through a pattern that had ended in victory hundreds of times in his mind. The routine would just take over. Winning would feel like the natural extension of this deeply ingrained habit.
And the ultimate test of this whole system came in the 2008 Beijing Olympics, the 200-meter butterfly final.
Right. On the third turn of the race, Phelps's goggles filled completely with water. He was totally blind. He couldn't see the lane lines, the black T mark on the bottom of the pool, or the wall for the final flip. For anyone else, that would be total panic.
But Phelps stayed calm. Why?
Because the routine, the Keystone habit, took over. Bowman had actually made him practice swimming in the dark at a pool in Michigan, specifically to prepare for this kind of unexpected failure.
So the mental rehearsal had accounted for this.
It had. The routine eliminated the need for conscious, panicked decision-making. Phelps just relied on his program knowledge. He started counting his strokes from the last flip to the final wall. He knew from practice the pattern required 19 or 20 strokes. He executed that entire final lap completely blind, counting every stroke, just as he'd rehearsed.
And he touched the wall and won the gold medal by a fingernail.
And when a reporter asked him afterwards what it felt like to swim blind, he just said, "It felt like I imagined it would."
Wow. The power of a Keystone habit is that it ensures you can perform even under the most extreme stress. So if habits are this powerful, if they can guide us blindly to gold medals, where does conscious effort, where does willpower fit into this automated landscape?
That's a huge question. We often think of willpower as this, a moral strength or a character trait. But the research suggests it's much more like a muscle that can get tired.
And this was shown really vividly in the famous cookie and radish experiment.
Yes, conducted by Mark Moravan and his colleagues. They wanted to test this resource depletion theory of self-control.
So tell us about the setup. It involved warm, freshly baked cookies, which just sounds cruel.
It was designed to be maximum temptation. They brought in hungry undergrads, told them to skip a meal, and then sat them in a room with a plate of warm, freshly baked chocolate chip cookies that smelled incredible, and a bowl of radishes.
A classic test of willpower.
A classic test. They divided the students into two groups. The radish eaters were told they had to ignore the delicious cookies and eat only the bland vegetable. This required massive, sustained willpower.
And the other group?
The cookie eaters, the control group, were told to eat the cookies and ignore the radishes, which of course requires basically no willpower at all.
So you've got one group that just depleted their willpower tank fighting temptation, and another group whose tank is completely full. That was the second part of the test.
Afterwards, both groups were moved to a different room and given an impossible geometric puzzle. They were told to keep working on it until they rang a bell to quit. The amount of time they spent working on the puzzle was the measurement of their remaining self-discipline.
And the finding was clear.
It was dramatic. The students who had used up all their willpower resisting the cookies, the radish eaters, they gave up significantly faster. On average, after only 19 minutes, the cookie eaters worked for almost twice as long, about 34 minutes.
A willpower is finite. It depletes with use, just like a muscle.
Exactly. And that finding had a huge influence on corporate training, especially in high-stress, high-turnover industries. A great example is Starbucks.
Right. Starbucks faced really high turnover because employees just lacked the self-discipline to handle what they called inflection points.
Those moments of peak stress. The morning rush, a complicated order, and critically, a rude or impatient customer. A normally calm employee whose willpower muscle was already tired from making coffee for hours might just snap under that kind of stress.
So Starbucks designed new training to instill what they called willpower habit loops, specifically for these stressful moments. They realized they couldn't rely on an employee's finite conscious reserve. They needed an automatic script.
And that script is known as the Latte method for handling angry customers, LATTE. It gives them a pre-programmed professional routine to follow the moment the angry customer arrives.
And the steps are listen, acknowledge.
Take action, think, and explain.
So how do they train this to make sure it becomes automatic when an employee is stressed out and their willpower is gone?
Through relentless repetition and, crucially, through high-stress role-playing. Employees practice the LAT method over and over again under simulated duress until it becomes as automatic as tying their shoes.
So it's a professional routine that leads to the reward of a positive outcome instead of a confrontation.
Exactly. This external framework gives employees the self-discipline they might not possess when their conscious mind is just exhausted. It turns self-discipline from an unreliable resource into a reliable, habitual response.
It's the ultimate application of what psychologists call an implementation intention. When I encounter XQ, the angry customer, I will perform Y routine, the latte method, to get Z reward, a positive resolution. It's how willpower itself becomes a habit.
And that brings us to a really compelling and honestly, a slightly unsettling part of our deep dive. How habits, when you understand them at this deep neurological level, can be predicted and even manipulated on a massive scale.
Right, by corporations. And there's no better example of this than the astonishing and ethically complex work done by the statistician at Target, Andrew Pohl.
Pohl was tasked with solving a very specific commercial problem: how to identify which customers were pregnant, even if they hadn't told anyone yet.
Which is the holy grail for retailers, right?
It's the holy grail, because the arrival of a new baby is the #1 habit-shifting moment in most adults' lives. All your old buying patterns go out the window. If Target could predict the due date, they had this magic window to capture all those new, durable spending habits for years to come.
So how did a statistician manage to figure out someone was pregnant just based on what they were buying?
He scoured Target's massive database, looking at their baby registry data. He linked those due dates back to historical shopping patterns over the previous year. And through pattern analysis and machine learning, Pohl identified about 25 products that, when purchased together, were extremely strong predictors of pregnancy.
And what were some of these key products? What were these subconscious cues?
They were often really mundane items that pointed to shifting physical and sensory habits. For instance, women in their second trimester often switch to unscented lotions or heavy-duty ones like cocoa butter. They start buying large quantities of specific supplements like zinc and magnesium, not just a general multivitamin.
So the algorithm could see these subtle shifts, the switch from regular lotion to cocoa butter, the purchase of certain vitamins, and connect those dots.
Precisely. His program could determine with something like 87% accuracy that a customer who bought, say, cocoa butter lotion, an unusually large handbag, and some zinc and magnesium supplements was pregnant and probably due in late August. This predictive power gave Target a massive, frankly unfair advantage.
But this created an immediate ethical dilemma, a marketing problem. How do you send ads for diapers and cribs to a customer without revealing that you know her secret before she's even announced it? That must be crazy.
It would be incredibly creepy and would trigger immediate suspicion or anger. They understood that while the customer's unconscious mind was shifting its habits, her conscious mind would reject any obvious manipulation. So the solution was basically the golden rule of habit change in reverse. Wrap the new, desired, routine-buying baby products from Target in something familiar and innocuous.
And they developed the sandwiching technique.
The sandwiching technique. They would camouflage the maternity and diaper coupons between completely random, unrelated product coupons in their big weekly mailers. So a pregnant customer would get ads for lawn furniture, cereal, maybe some wine glasses, and then, buried 3 pages in, a coupon for a crib.
So the whole mailer seems anonymous and familiar. It bypasses her conscious defenses.
Exactly. It leverages the existing habit of reading the weekly mailer to insert this new, profitable habit, all without the customer realizing how precisely she was being targeted. And it worked beautifully. Target's revenues grew dramatically.
That is manipulative genius. And the music industry uses a similar tactic to influence our listening habits, showing that familiarity is the key cue for acceptance. The book used the example of Outkast's huge hit, Hey Ya!
Yeah, which is a great example because when Hey Ya was first played on Top 40 radio, listeners hated it. The tune-out factor, the percentage of listeners who switched stations, was a disastrous 26.6%.
Because it was just too different.
It was too unfamiliar, too structurally different from everything else on the charts. Listeners instinctively prefer songs that sound like songs they already like. Familiarity is comfortable.
So even though algorithms predicted it would be a hit, it was failing. How did radio DJs apply the habit loop to make this strange new song stick?
They used what's called textbook playlist theory. They would sandwich the new, unfamiliar song between 2 massive consensus popular hits, what they call sticky songs.
Ah, so you hear a favorite song, then Hey Ya, then another favorite song right after.
Exactly. You're incentivized to stay tuned through the unfamiliar routine. The familiar hits provided the necessary cues and rewards to keep you listening, and it effectively created this temporary habit of listening through the strange middle song to get to the familiar reward on the other side.
And the brain just quickly adapted.
It did. Hey Ya became part of that overall listening routine. Once the sandwiching started, the tune-out factor just plummeted, eventually settling at a highly successful 5.7%. People's listening habits had shifted to expect and even crave, hey ya, and it went on to win a Grammy. It shows how quickly new habits can be created when they're camouflaged within existing powerful patterns.
And all these powerful automatic loops, they raise the deepest ethical question of all. It's one that lawyers and researchers and ethicists are still struggling with. Are we responsible for our habits once they become these automatic neurological loops that are beyond our conscious choice?
This question is explored in the book through 2 really stark and troubling legal cases. The first one is the case of Brian Thomas.
Thomas was a sleepwalker who, during a sleep terror, automatically strangled his wife. He believed he was fighting a masked intruder who was wearing a black fleece.
He was following a primitive, deeply ingrained habit, the instinct to fight an attacker and protect a loved one. And his lawyer successfully argued that his primitive brain just took over without any conscious choice. His capacity for decision-making was entirely incapacitated by the sleep terror.
So he was acquitted due to automatism. The law, in this case, agreed that since his action was entirely automatic, carried out by these ancient brain structures without conscious intent or control, he shouldn't bear the blame for the tragic outcome. His decision-making was just offline.
Now contrast that with the case of Angie Bachman. She was a pathological gambler who lost over $900,000, mostly relying on credit lines from her Oz casinos.
She started gambling out of boredom and crippling anxiety after her kids left home. She was desperately searching for that reward of escape or numbness or just feeling skilled at something.
And her routine, playing 2 hands at once, never betting less than $25, it quickly became automatic. It was her escape mechanism from anxiety. And meanwhile, Haraz was collecting meticulous data on her play down to the minute. They knew exactly how much she lost, when she took breaks, what she ordered to drink.
And they actively exploited that data.
They did. When her play would start to flag, Haraz would send a limousine to her house with free hotel rooms, complimentary airfare, massive credit line extensions, all designed to trigger the cue of excitement and the craving for the reward of escape, just to pull her back in. They were manipulating her compulsion with the same precision as Target's algorithm.
And the science shows that pathological gamblers like Bachman, they actually process information differently. Their basal ganglia, their habit centers, are highly sensitive to near misses.
Exactly. Those near misses, the jackpot symbol landing just one spot away, they act as these incredibly powerful cues that just feed the craving to win and keep the loop spinning. And casinos are intentionally designed to deliver those near misses constantly.
So the legal paradox here is pretty stark. If Brian Thomas was judged not responsible because his primitive, automated habit overwhelmed his consciousness and his capacity for choice, what about Angie Bachman? Her neurological processes were being similarly hijacked and manipulated by an external system, the casino, which was designed specifically to make her basal ganglia cling to that compulsive behavior.
Bachman herself even said, "It felt like I couldn't say no, like whenever they dangled the smallest temptation in front of me, my brain would shut off." It suggests a very similar loss of conscious choice, and yet her actions had these massive financial and personal consequences.
The difference ultimately is that while habits are automatic, they are still malleable. And the decision to change the routine remains a conscious moral choice that society demands we make.
It does. If we accept Bachman's total lack of responsibility, the entire system of personal finance and responsibility it collapses.
So the question remains, if a new habit loop is successfully installed, why do people relapse, especially during high-stress moments? The book talks about an alcoholic who quit for 5 years and then immediately fell off the wagon when his mother got cancer. What's the missing ingredient that turns a successful habit replacement into a durable, lifelong change, one that can withstand that kind of existential stress?
The book argues that the missing ingredient is belief.
Belief.
We see this most clearly in the structures of Alcoholics Anonymous. AA succeeds not just because it creates a new habit loop. The cue is stress or anxiety. The new routine is sharing at a meeting. The reward is relief and community. It succeeds because participants learn how to believe in a higher power.
And it wasn't necessarily the spiritual concept of God that mattered. It was the creation of the skill of belief itself.
Precisely. Once people learn how to believe in something, whether it's a higher power or the collective strength of the group or just the methodology of the 12 steps, that skill of belief starts spilling over into other areas. It builds self-efficacy. They begin to believe that they themselves can change. And that belief is what translates a reworked habit loop into a permanent, durable behavior that can withstand the biggest shocks and stresses life can throw at you.
So you have to believe in the possibility of change for the change to truly stick.
You do. It needs to be durable under fire.
That's a really profound takeaway. It's not just about the mechanics of the loop, but the internal conviction to maintain it.
So, to quickly review the territory we've covered today, we started by dissecting the core mechanism of the habit loop, that cue, routine, reward sequence. And we established that the ancient basal ganglia automates this whole process through chunking, a truth we saw so dramatically with Eugene Pauly and in the rat maze experiments.
Then we explored the crucial golden rule of habit change. To modify a bad habit, you have to satisfy the underlying craving by keeping the old cue, delivering the same reward, but deliberately inserting a new positive routine. We saw this in Lisa Allen's transformation from smoking to jogging and in Febrez's brilliant pivot.
We examined the radiating power of Keystone habits, like Paul O'Neill's obsessive focus on safety at Alcoa, which forced organizational efficiency, or Michael Phelps's pre-race routine that guaranteed success even when he was swimming blind.
And we noted that willpower is a finite, depletable muscle. It's a resource that has to be conserved and trained using pre-programmed routines, like the Starbucks latte method for handling those stressful inflection points.
Finally, we navigated that complex ethical terrain of responsibility. We looked at how powerful automated habits can be predicted and manipulated by companies like Target and casinos, and how the legal system really struggles to assign blame in moments of extreme automatism.
And we found that the crucial distinction for lasting, durable change is the development of a deep-seated belief in your own capacity to maintain that new routine, even when life throws its biggest challenges at you.
The science is unambiguous. Every single habit, no matter how complex or deeply ingrained it is, from managing your money to conquering addiction to winning an Olympic gold medal, is malleable.
But genuine change requires determination. It requires deliberate, surgical planning. Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you to take away. Considering how deeply entrenched our habits are, and how effectively companies like Target and casinos can predict and manipulate them, what is the one keystone habit you could focus on changing today that would make the most profound, cascading difference in your life? Don't just wish for the change. Be deliberate about it. When you identify the cue, make a conscious, pre-planned rule for yourself. When I encounter X cue, I will perform Y routine to get Z reward. Good luck with your next deep dive into your own routine.